Good Shabbos. Thank you for having me in this beautiful community on this wonderful Shabbat celebrating trans pride. I'm going to speak tonight about what I believe is the incredible transformative potential that trans and non-binary Jews have within the Jewish community and within the world at large. But before I do, I want to ask a very fundamental question. What does it mean to be a Jew? For me, a core Jewish idea that I think is central in our liturgy, in our rituals, in our history, in our identity, is this idea that you have to know where you come from to know where you're going. That you have to root yourself in the narratives of yesterday to build strong stories for tomorrow. Year after year, generation after generation, century after century, we have told the stories of our ancestors, of being slaves in Egypt, of wandering in the desert, of building relationship with God. We talk about the past in order to situate ourselves in the arc of history. Well, what about genderqueer Jews and trans Jews? Do we have a story of our Jewish past that can illuminate our way into the future? This question feels especially important right now in this moment when we're stepping out from the sorrow and the upheaval of the pandemic and we're looking out into this new world that we're now going to create together. Are there ancestral roots that trans and genderqueer Jews can lean into? Do we have that power of history to hold us as we move forward? In the version of Judaism that I grew up with, the answer was no. I grew up in an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, which was a very binary world. There were men and there were women, and there was a mechitza, a thick, uncrossable boundary between them. And the view of Jewish tradition that I was given as a child was one that reified this gender binary. There was no room for imagining any other way of being, and there were no narratives from the past that told any other kind of story. I was told that I was a girl. And when I began to chafe at the expectations of my gender, and when I found the bodily changes of puberty distressing, I had no way to understand my experience. I had no way to contextualize my fear and my overwhelm. In fact, the only message that I received was that my ancestors were disappointed in me, that I was cutting myself off from the past. In my late teens, because of these challenges and others, I was pushed out of my community, and I traveled through Buddhism and Sufism and atheism, looking for spiritual meaning, looking for a home for my complicated, passionate spirit. And about a decade ago, I returned to Judaism, but this time on my own terms. And I soon came out as genderqueer, and now I'm studying for the rabbinate. And it has been astounding to realize how tiny and narrow a vision of Judaism I had been given. I am finding that the wisdom of our ancestors is so much more expansive and so much more magical and so much more welcoming than I could have ever guessed. And from where I stand now, I want to propose that actually trans people have a secret but central position in canonical Jewish history, encoded in plain sight in the stories of Yosef and Dina. So you may remember the two matriarchs in the Jewish tradition. They are sisters, Leah and Rachel, and they are married to the same man, Jacob. And Leah and Rachel are both pregnant. And when the commentator Targum Yonatan in Genesis says this fascinating commentary, he says that Leah at this point already has 6 sons and is now pregnant with a boy. And her sister Rachel has been unable to get pregnant for years and years, and she's finally pregnant and she's about to have a girl. And in this culture, at this time, boys are prized so much more than girls, and Leah feels really bad for her sister Rachel. She's going to have her 7th son, Rachel's only going to have a daughter, so Leah prays on Rachel's behalf. And God takes heed, and God switches the sexes of the babies in utero, so that Leah's boy baby develops a body that is marked as female, and Rachel's girl baby develops a body that is marked as male. Leah names her baby Dina, and the rabbis say, God judged, the Hebrew word for judgment is din, that the baby's sex should be changed, so din becomes Dina. And Rachel names her baby Yosef, or Joseph, God will add. And if you follow Dina and Yosef's lives, you can hear the faint tune of an alternate gender, of gender complexity from this origin story throughout their mythology. About Dina, it is said in Genesis, "Vatetze Dina leros bivnos haaretz." Dina goes out to see the women of the land. which is not typical behavior of women at this time, to go out, to leave camp by herself. And why is Dina going out to go look at other women? And things don't go well for Dina when they cross the gender binary. They are attacked and they're shamed, and they largely fade from the recorded story. But even in these faint clues, I think Dina leaves behind a legacy of gender play that we can seize hold of, that we can honor. We can make Dina's spirit bright and find our own sense of ancestral connection and claim Dina as a trans ancestor. We know a lot more about Dina's half-brother Yosef. In Genesis, it says that Yosef was Yafa Toa v'Yafa Mir'ah, beautiful of form and beautiful to look at, which is the kind of language that the Torah normally reserves for women. And the rabbis describe Yosef as feminine, saying that Yosef tended his eyes and lifted his heels and primped his hair. Now, Yosef's father, the patriarch Jacob, adores this unusual child. We know famously Jacob makes Yosef a beautiful coat of many colors. But Yosef is more than a flamboyant dresser. Yosef is also a seer. At night in their sleep, they have these prophetic dreams of the future. Unfortunately, the rest of Yosef's family system is not willing to love and accept them as they are. And we know Yosef's brothers sell Yosef into slavery. Yosef ends up in jail in Egypt, but then rises to become second in command, the advisor to the Pharaoh, and then of course becomes the redeemer of their entire family when the family comes looking for refuge from a famine. And Rabbi Erwin Keller points out that there's this amazing tikkun, a restoration that happens for Yosef. That although initially so much of their family responded really poorly to the unique gender identity that they had, by the end of Yosef's life, we see Yosef as an elder assuming within the family a sacred matriarchal position. In Genesis, it says that Yosef's great-grandchildren are Yuledu al Birkei Yosef, birthed upon the knees of Yosef, which is traditionally the position of the matriarch or the godmother who holds the laboring woman on her knees as she births, binding the new baby through the birthing mother and back to the godmother. And then Yosef's father, on his deathbed, Jacob, he blesses Yosef with Birchas Shadayim V'Racham, blessings of breast and womb. These are rich narratives that trans and non-binary Jews today can call upon. Were Dina and Yosef non-binary? Were they trans? I don't know if we can exactly tailor those narratives to our modern concepts, but I do think that we can claim these characters, claim them as our roots. And I'll admit, I don't feel so good about the disappearance of Dina relative to the prominence of Yosef. But there is this really interesting detail from the life of Yosef in that Yosef, we're told, marries a woman named Osnat. Who is Osnat? Well, there is a rabbinic tradition brought down in the Pirkei de Eliezer that says that Osnat is the daughter of Dina. So Yosef, the line of Yosef and the line of Dina come together in this marriage of Yosef and Osnat. So when we speak of the lineage of Yosef, we're actually speaking of the lineage of Yosef and Dina. And maybe there's an echo of this double lineage in the fact that Yosef and Osnat's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, both become established as their own tribe of Israel, which is not an honor given to any of the other grandchildren of Jacob. So I'd like to imagine that these two children, these two tribes, represent both stories of Yosef and Dina. When I was a child, my mother would bounce me on her knee and chant, "The Torah was commanded to us by Moshe, the inheritance of the community of Jacob." When I sing that verse now, I sing a different version, a version of that verse that recognizes a larger Torah, a Torah that is more inclusive and that, to me, better reflects the true vastness of the divine. I say, Torah tziva lanu Miriam, morasha kihilas Yosef v'Dina. The Torah was commanded to us by the prophetess Miriam, the inheritance of the community of Yosef and Dina. And when our prayers traditionally list the patriarchs, I insert Yosef and Dina instead. Yosef in particular has a special place in the mystical tradition. In the Kabbalah, which divides God and men into a map of 10 sfirot, which means chakra or energy center. And one of these sfirot, the energy center of the sexual organs, is called Yesod, which means foundation. And Yesod is associated with Yosef. I think it's really interesting that ancient Jewish mystics linked the foundation of everything and the sexual organs to this one character who lived a life so outside the traditional cisgender narrative. In the world's oldest book club, the weekly Torah portion reading, this week we find a glimpse of the house of Yosef and Dina, because the star of this week's Parsha, this week's portion reading, the hero is Moses' right-hand guy, Yeshua the child of Nun, from the tribe of Ephraim, which is a tribe that traces its lineage directly to Yosef and maybe Dina. So at this point in the Torah, the Jews have left slavery in Egypt, and Moses sends out 12 scouts, one from each tribe, to check out the land of their ancestors that they want to reclaim. And one of those scouts is Yehoshua. Well, the 12 scouts come back from their trip, and 10 of them are terrified. They say, this new territory is scary. We cannot handle it. And the people listen to the scouts and they say, oh, we are afraid. We will not go to this place that you're talking about. We will not move into this tomorrow. No way. And the leaders of the Jewish people, Moshe and Aaron, are totally overwhelmed. But then 2 of the scouts, 2 of the 12, speak up. Who are those 2? Kalev from the tribe of Judah, which eventually produces the Davidic line, the Messianic line, and our buddy Yeshua. And Kalev and Yeshua speak with courage and moral authority. They say, don't be afraid. We can move into this future. We have aligned with God, with truth. We're going to be okay. And the people are so enraged by what they hear from them that they want to pelt Kalev and Yeshua with stones, and God has to step in to protect them. And God is pretty angry at the people for not believing Kalev and Yeshua, for not having faith in an inspired future, in a better future. And God says, all the people who had no faith are going to end up living out the rest of their lives in this barren desert. They may no longer be slaves in Egypt, but they have not chosen freedom. Only Kalev and Yeshua get to move into this new future, into the land of milk and honey. I hear this really powerful subtext in this story about having Yehoshua in particular, from the house of Yosef, from the lineage of gender play, that he is the one who is bold enough to believe in the future. And the unfortunate consequence of people who resist that vision, who want to pelt those who speak of it with stones. I think it affirms our own capacity as queer Jews, as trans Jews, to believe in a larger, more inclusive future for all of us, and the resistance that we sometimes face, and the courage we're called upon to show to be the ones who keep believing. Now, Yosef shows up again in another fascinating piece of Jewish theology. So, tradition says that the Messianic age is going to come through the hands of 2 messiahs. We have the more famous Messianic figure, which is the Messiah that's the son of David, the Messiah from the Davidic house. But before then, the rabbis taught, we're going to begin our redemption with a Messiah that is the son of Yosef, a liberator from the house of Yosef, or maybe we can call it the house of Yosef and Dina. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say something that's a little bold, maybe a little speculative, but it seems to me that we are from the house of Yosef and Dina, my trans and non-binary friends. We have risen to the forefront of our culture's consciousness. We have been supported and loved by allies in the LGBTQ and cis communities, and in turn we have offered each other and ourselves and the world what is sometimes called Mashiach Zeit, a liberatory consciousness, a kind of redemption where we elevate spirit above hidebound tradition, where we understand the play and the power of gender, where we ask pronouns and we respect the way that people self-identify. These things may seem like technical courtesies or grammatical specifics, but they are actually groundbreaking moral norms. Trans-inclusive norms are norms of profound respect for each human being as a reflection of the divine. Trans-inclusive norms are norms of compassion and norms of honor. Trans-inclusive norms affirm a new future, a new territory for our people, a new world that is more just, a world that is more empowered, a world that for the first time in modern Western history asks that we honor and elevate the sacredness of self-determination and the sanctity of each individual human story. So Mazel Tov on this Trans Pride Shabbat to my trans and non-binary siblings of the house of Yosef and Dina. We celebrate your existence. We celebrate your struggles and your pride and your courage and your vulnerability and your beautiful complexity. And Mazel Tov to our cis allies who support us and whose open eyes and willingness to believe in a better vision of our world have helped us arrive at this moment. Let us step into tomorrow with our gender-bending ancestors smiling down upon us. Let us step into tomorrow armed with the transformative power of trans-inclusive values. Let us step into tomorrow spreading the liberatory consciousness of the house of Yosef and Dina into our communities, into the world, and into our own hearts. Good Shabbos.